Hey fellow nerds. Today we are going to learn properties of LTI systems, and these include commutative property, distributive property, associative property, memory, invertibility, causality, stability, and unit step response of LTI systems. Let us start with commutative property of discrete time LTI systems. It states that convolution of x of n and h of n is the same as convolution of h of n and x of n. The order in which you take them doesn't matter. Let us see how we can prove it. We know convolution of x of n and h of n can be written as summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k h of n minus k. If we change the order, convolution of h of n with x of n will be summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity h of k x of n minus k. We have to prove that these two are the same. To do that, take k is equal to n minus r, where r is some integer. Then, if you take convolution of h of n and x of n, we have summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity h of k x of n minus k. We have to substitute k equal to n minus r, but before that we also have to set the new limits. K is n minus r, so we can write r is n minus k. When k tends to be minus infinity, here we get n minus k, n is an integer, so it will be n minus of minus infinity plus infinity. So r will tend to become plus infinity. On the other hand, if k tends to be plus infinity as the upper limit, then we'll get n minus infinity and r will tend to be minus infinity. So value of r is also changing from minus infinity to plus infinity. Therefore, we can write summation from r equals minus infinity to infinity. H of k is n minus r multiplied by x of n minus k will be r. So this becomes summation from r equals minus infinity to infinity x of r h of n minus r. But this is actually the convolution of x of n and h of n. Now, one confusion that can arise here is that we defined the convolution of x of n and h of n as summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k h of n minus k. Over here, what we got is summation from r equals minus infinity to infinity x of r h of n minus r. But I still called it convolution of x of n and h of n, even though the variable is different. The reason is, when we are taking summation or integration, it doesn't actually matter what you're calling the variable to which you're actually going to give limits later. Let me give you an example from integration. I want to calculate integral from 0 to 1 of x dx, and I want to calculate integral 0 to 1 of t dt. The first one will be x square by 2 from 0 to 1. Second one will be t square by 2 from 0 to 1. I'm giving limits. Here I get 1 by 2. I'm giving limits. Here I get 1 by 2. So it doesn't matter what you're calling the variable to which you're going to give the limits. Because whatever you call it, you're going to give the same limits and you're going to get the same final answer. The same is applicable in summation also. Here we are calling it k and we're giving it values from minus infinity to infinity. Here we're calling it r, but we're still giving the values minus infinity to infinity. So the final answer that you get will only be convolution of x of n and h of n. So we can conclude that according to commutative property for a discrete time LTI system, convolution of x of n and h of n is the same as convolution of h of n and x of n. The order doesn't matter. Let's move on to continuous time LTI system. According to commutative property, here we have convolution of x of t and h of t is the same as convolution of h of t and x of t. Let's write the proof here as well. We know convolution of x of t and h of t is defined like this: integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h of t minus tau d tau. Similarly, if I am taking h of t first and then x of t, I will get integral from minus infinity to infinity h of tau x of t minus tau d tau. To prove that they are equal, we will take tau is equal to t minus p, where p is some integer. Then if we take the convolution of h of t with x of t, by definition it is integral from minus infinity to infinity h of tau x of t minus tau d tau. We have to change the variable. To substitute this, first we have to find what happens to the limit. Tau is t minus p, so we can write p is t minus tau. When tau tends to minus infinity, p is t minus tau, so p will tend to be plus infinity. The same way, if tau tends to be plus infinity, p tends to be minus infinity. So we can write integral from infinity to minus infinity. H of tau becomes h of t minus p. X of t minus tau becomes x of p. Now what happens to d tau? We have tau is equal to t minus p. Differentiating on both sides, d tau is equal to dt minus dp. But dt is 0 because we are taking t as a constant. So d tau is just minus dp. So we can write minus dp here. Now we are integrating from infinity to minus infinity. Let us change the interval. But when you do that, you'll have to multiply the entire thing with minus 1 to compensate it. But we already have a negative here, so that will be cancelled. What we get is simply this: integral from minus infinity to infinity h of t minus p x of p dp. The limits have been changed and the negative has been removed. Let's rearrange this. X of t minus p can come after x of p. Now this is simply equal to convolution of x of t and h of t. The same thing that happened with discrete time system is also happening here. The variable is different. We defined convolution of x of t and h of t like this: integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h of t minus tau d tau. Here we have integral from minus infinity to infinity x of p h of t minus p dp. But we just learned that the name of the variable doesn't matter as long as you're giving the same limit. So this is also the same as convolution of x of t and h of t. Hence we can conclude that in continuous time LTI systems also, the order of convolution does not matter. The next property we have to learn is distributive property. Let's take a discrete time LTI system first. According to distributive property, if you take the convolution of some x of n and some h1 of n, add it to the convolution of x of n and some other h2 of n, this is the same as taking convolution of x of n and the sum of h1 of n and h2 of n. This is kind of similar to how 2 into 3 plus 2 into 4 is equal to 2 into 3 plus 4. Right. Similarly, we can write in a continuous time LTI system x of t and h1 of t plus convolution of x of t and some h2 of t. This will be the same as taking convolution of h of t with the sum of h1 of t and h2 of t. This can be interpreted better using block diagrams. Let's say you have a system with impulse response x1 of t and a system with impulse response x2 of t. You're giving the same input x of t into both of them. The first one gives an output y1 of t and the second one gives an output y2 of t. We are adding them together and we get y of t. According to distributive property, this is the same as taking a system whose impulse response is the sum of impulse responses of those systems and giving the same input. You will get the same output y of t. Now let us prove it. We will prove it for a continuous time LTI system. The proof for a discrete time LTI system is also very similar and you can try it for yourself. First, let us take the convolution of x of t with the impulse response of the first system h1 of t. And this is mathematically integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h1 of t minus tau d tau. Similarly, for the second system, the output will be convolution of x of t with its impulse response, that is h2 of t. And this will be integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h2 of t minus tau d tau. Now let us see what will be the output of the combined system. We'll have to take the convolution of x of t with h1 of t plus h2 of t. And this gives us integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau multiplied by h1 of t minus tau plus h2 of t minus tau d tau. Now we can split these and do the integration separately. That is, this can be written as integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h1 of t minus tau d tau plus integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h2 of t minus tau d tau. Now the first term is the convolution of x of t with h1 of t and the second term is the convolution of x of t with h2 of t. Let's make some space here to write that down. So this is convolution of x of t and h1 of t plus convolution of x of t and h2 of t. Now, as a consequence of the commutative property and distributive property, we can write convolution of sum of x1 of n and x2 of n with h of n is the same as convolution of x1 of n with h of n plus convolution of x2 of n with h of n. Now this can be interpreted easily by using a block diagram like this. x1 of n is given as an input to a system whose impulse response is h of n and it gives an output y1 of n. x2 of n is given as an input to a system whose impulse response is the same h of n and it gives us an output y2 of n. We add them together to get the final output, that is y of n. This is the same as taking the sum of the two signals first, giving it as an input to a system who has the same impulse response h of n, because this will also give us the same old output y of n. Let us solve a problem now. We have to find out y of n, which is the convolution of x of n and h of n. X of n is given, it is 1 by 2 raised to n u of n plus 2 raised to n u of minus n. H of n is also given, it is simply u of n. Here x of n is a summation of two functions. According to what we just learned, we can consider them as two different signals, find their individual outputs, and then just add them to get our final response. That's exactly what we're going to do. Let us take x1 of n is 1 by 2 raised to n u of n and x2 of n is 2 raised to n u of minus n. Then the output of this system can be written as y of n is the convolution of x1 of n plus x2 of n with h of n. But using the distributive property, we can write y of n is the sum of y1 of n and y2 of n. and here y1 of n is the output to an input x1 of n. That is convolution of x1 of n with h of n. Similarly, y2 of n will be the output to x2 of n being the input. So convolution of x2 of n and h of n. Previously, we have already solved a question that was similar to the first input. We had to find the convolution of alpha raised to n u of n and u of n. And we got the answer was 1 minus alpha raised to n plus 1 by 1 minus alpha for n greater than 0, and it was 0 for n less than 0. Here, instead of alpha, we have 1 by 2. We can substitute 1 by 2 for alpha, and that will give us y1 of n. 1 minus 1 by 2 raised to n plus 1 divided by 1 minus 1 by 2. Or this can be written as 2 times 1 minus 2 raised to negative of n plus 1. Now we have to solve for y2 of n. We have x2 of n is 2 raised to n u of minus n and h of n is u of n. The first step is to write x2 of n and h of n as functions of k. So let's write down x2 of k is equal to 2 raised to k u of minus k. We also need h of n minus k to take the convolution. Since h of n is u of n, this will be u of n minus k. We are taking u of n minus k as a function of k. So we can write this as u of minus k plus n or u of minus of k minus n. Since we have k minus n, this will start at n, and since the scaling factor is negative, it will be left-sided. x2 of k is 2 raised to k u of minus k. So we can write x2 of k exists from minus infinity to 0. H of n minus k is left-sided and it is hinged at n. So h of n minus k will have non-zero values from minus infinity to n. Let's take the first case, case 1, where n is greater than or equal to 0. In this case, x2 of k only exists from minus infinity to 0, but h of n minus k exists from minus infinity to n, which is a positive number. So obviously the overlapping will only happen between minus infinity and 0. So to get y2 of n for n greater than or equal to 0, we only have to take summation from k equals minus infinity to 0. x2 of k here is going to be 2 raised to k, and h of n minus k will be 1 because it's a unit step sequence. If you give k equals 0, it becomes 1. Plus, if you give minus 1, you get 2 raised to minus 1, 1 by 2. If you give minus 2, you're getting 1 by 2 square. It goes on like that. So basically, this is a geometric progression with common ratio being 1 by 2, which is less than 1. In such a case, we can use the sum of an infinite GP for which the common ratio has a magnitude less than 1. It is 1 by 1 minus r. So we get y2 of n is 1 by 1 minus 1 by 2, and this is equal to 2. So y2 of n is 2 for n greater than or equal to 0. Let us take case 2, where n is less than 0. So x2 of k here is from minus infinity to 0. H of n minus k is from minus infinity to a negative number. So their overlapping is going to be from minus infinity to whatever is the negative number. That means to get y2 of n, we have to take summation from k equals minus infinity to n. x2 of k here is 2 raised to k and h of n minus k is 1. Let's start from the upper limit. If you give k equal to n, you get 2 raised to n. Then if you give k equals n minus 1, you get 2 raised to n minus 1. If you give n minus 2, you get 2 raised to n minus 2, and this goes on like that till infinity. Let us take 2 raised to n out of it. First term becomes 1, second term becomes 2 raised to minus 1, third term becomes 2 raised to minus 2, and it goes on. So we have 2 raised to n multiplied by 1 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 2 square plus etc. This is again the same infinite GP whose common ratio is 1 by 2. So the sum is going to be 1 by 1 minus 1 by 2. This becomes 2 raised to n multiplied by 1 by 1 minus 1 by 2. 1 by 1 minus 1 by 2 is 2. So we get y2 of n is 2 raised to n plus 1 for n less than 0. Taking all of them together, we get for n less than 0, y1 of n is 0, y2 of n is 2 raised to n plus 1. For n greater than or equal to 0, y1 of n was 2 into 1 minus 2 raised to minus of n plus 1, and y2 of n was 2. The final output y of n is going to be the sum of individual outputs. So we can write y of n is going to be the sum of these two for n less than 0, that is 2 raised to n plus 1 for n less than 0. For n greater than 0, it will be the sum of these two. y1 of n is 2 multiplied by 1 minus 2 multiplied by 2 raised to minus n minus 1. y2 of n is plus 2. So 2 plus 2 we get 4 minus 2 raised to minus n minus 1 plus 1. So we get 2 raised to minus n. So y of n is 4 minus 2 raised to minus n for n greater than or equal to 0. Let us move on to the next property we have to learn. It is associative property. For a discrete time LTI system, we can write it this way. If you take the convolution of x of n with the result of convolution of h1 of n and h2 of n, it is the same as taking convolution of h of n with h1 of n and then take the convolution of this result with h2 of n. Similarly, for a continuous time LTI system, we can write taking convolution of x of t with the result of convolution of h1 of t and h2 of t is the same as taking convolution of x of t and h1 of t first and then take the convolution of its result with h2 of t. This can be interpreted using a block diagram like this. Let us say you have two systems, one of impulse response x1 of t and one of impulse response x2 of t. You are giving x of t as an input to the first one and its output is given as an input to the second one, and finally you get y of t as the output. According to associative property, this is the same as taking a different system whose impulse response is the convolution of the individual impulse responses of these systems. You will get the same output y of t. We learned that by commutative property, the order of convolution does not matter. Therefore, unit impulse response of a cascade of n LTI systems will not depend on the order in which they are connected. Cascade means series interconnection. For example, if you give x of t as an input to a system whose impulse response is h1 of t and its output is given as an input to another system of impulse response h2 of t, which gives you the final output y of t, this is the same as taking the second system first and the first system second. The order doesn't matter. Instead of taking h1 of t first and h2 of t second, you can also take a single system that has impulse response, which is the convolution of the individual responses. That will also give you the same output. But since order of convolution doesn't matter, you can take a system with impulse response that is the convolution of h2 of t first and then h1 of t. That will also give you the same output. So if there are n LTI systems cascaded, it doesn't matter in which order you are taking them, you will always get the same output. Let us take an example. In the first example, we have a system that multiplies the input by 2, and we have a system that divides the input by 3. We are giving x of t as an input. The first system multiplies it by 2, so the output will be 2x of t. Now this is given as an input to the second system which divides it by 3. So we get y of t which is 2 by 3 x of t. Let us interchange the systems. First, let's take the dividing system and then the multiplying system. We're giving x of t as input. The first system will divide it by 3 and we'll get x of t divided by 3. Then this is given as an input to the second system which multiplies it by 2. So the final output will be 2 by 3 x of t. We got the same output. In the second example, we have a system that multiplies the input by 2 and a system that squares the input. We are giving x of t as an input to the first one. It multiplies it by 2. So we get 2x of t. Now this is given as an input to the system that squares it. So the output is 4x square of t. Let us interchange the systems. So x of t goes as an input to the first system that squares it. We get x square of t. It is given as an input to the system that multiplies it by 2 and the final output is 2x square of t. But this is not the same as 4x square of t. Are they supposed to be the same? I did this example to remind you of the most important thing that you have to keep in mind, that these properties that we are learning are applicable for LTI systems. That is, systems that are linear and time invariant. A system that multiplies the input by 2 is linear. A system that divides the input by 3 is also linear. But a system that squares the input is not linear. We have done that example when we were learning linearity of systems. So in the first example, the property held because the systems were linear. In the second example, it did not hold because one of the systems was non-linear. The next property we have to learn is memory. Let us start with the discrete time LTI system. We know that any system is memoryless if its output at any time depends only on the value of input at that particular time. So, for an LTI system which is linear and time invariant, this is possible only if h of n is equal to 0 for n not equal to 0. What does that mean? See, h of n is the output of an LTI system when the input is an impulse sequence which only has value at n equal to 0. So the output h of n should only have value at n equal to 0 so that we can call it memoryless. For all other value of n, the output should be 0. That is, the output h of n should be 0 for all n that is not equal to 0 since the input impulse sequence only has value at n equal to 0. Since delta of n only has value at n equal to 0, the response h of n should also only have value at 0. This implies that if an LTI system's impulse response is not 0 for any value of n that is not equal to 0, then we can say it has memory. Keeping all of these in mind, let us write down a condition for an LTI system to be memoryless. For a memoryless discrete time LTI system, h of n will be equal to some constant multiplied by delta of n. Don't worry, I'll explain this to you with an example. Assume we have a system whose impulse response h of n is given by 2 delta of n. This means if you give an input to this system which is equal to delta of n, you will get an output that looks like this. It has value 2 at n equal to 0. We gave input at 0, we got output at 0. Everywhere else the output is 0. So this is a memoryless system. So impulse response for a discrete time LTI system which is memoryless will always be of this form, some constant multiplied by delta of n. Since the input is delta of n which has non-zero value only at 0, the output should only have some non-zero value at 0. And in general we can call that non-zero value C. So we get h of n is C delta of n. Let us now derive the output of such a system. Impulse response of this system h of n is C delta of n. Let us give an input x of n to this system. So for an input x of n, y of n will be the convolution of x of n and h of n. So summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k h of n minus k. That is summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k h of n minus k is c delta of n minus k. So this multiplied by c delta of n minus k. C is a constant, we can take it out of the summation. So c multiplied by summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k delta of n minus k. Now this summation is what we used to call shifting. This is how we write a function x of n as a summation of amplitude scaled and time shifted impulse sequences. Remember? So this summation is actually just x of n. That means this is equal to c multiplied by x of n. So for a discrete time LTI system without memory, the output will be x of n multiplied by some constant c. It can be shown like this. Impulse response of the system is c delta of n. You give an input x of n, the output will be c multiplied by x of n. Let us make an observation. We know c here is a constant, it can take any value, but if c is equal to 1, then the output y of n is going to be x of n itself. We call such a system identity system. But in that case, what would be the impulse response of this system? C is 1, so impulse response C delta of n will just be delta of n. So we can conclude that impulse response of a discrete time identity system is just delta of n. Now let us consider a continuous time LTI system. The definition is the same. A system is memoryless if its output at any time depends only on the value of input at that particular time. For a continuous time LTI system, this is possible if h of t is 0 for all t that is not equal to 0. The reason for this is the input that we give delta of t to get the output h of t only has value at t equal to 0. So the response should also only have value at 0. That is, if the LTI system's impulse response is not 0 for any t that is not equal to 0, then it has a memory. Therefore, we can conclude that for a memory-less continuous time LTI system, the impulse response will be of this form. H of t is equal to some constant multiplied by delta of t. As an example, we can take a continuous time LTI system whose impulse response is given as h of t is 2 delta of t. The input is an impulse function. It has magnitude 1 and is at 0, and the output will be an impulse at 0 but with magnitude 2. We gave the input at 0, so the output should be some value at 0. If that value is c, then we can write impulse response of a continuous time LTI system with no memory is c times delta of t. Let's now try to find the output of this system. For an input x of t, the output y of t is given as the convolution of x of t and the impulse response h of t. So, integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h of t minus tau d tau. But h of t minus tau is c delta of t minus tau. This becomes integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau c delta of t minus tau d tau. C is a constant, we can take it out of the integration. So we get C integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau delta of t minus tau d tau. Now this is again what we call shifting. This is how we write a function x of t as an integral of amplitude scaled and time shifted impulse functions. So this is just c multiplied by x of t. We can conclude that the output of a continuous time LTI system who is memoryless, whose impulse response is given as c delta of t, is cx of t. If you give an input x of t, the output will be x of t multiplied by c. It can be shown as a block diagram like this. We have a system whose impulse response is c delta of t. You give an input x of t, the output you get will be cx of t. Let's make an observation here as well. Since c can take any value, let us take c is equal to 1. Then the output y of t will be equal to the input x of t. And this is what we call an identity system. Since c is equal to 1, the impulse response of this identity system is going to be just delta of t. The next property we have to learn is invertibility. We have already learned the definition of an invertible system. A system is invertible if an inverse system exists that, when connected in series with the original system, it produces an output that is equal to the input to the first system. Let's take an example of two discrete time systems. The first one has impulse response h1 of n, the second one has impulse response h2 of n. We gave x of n as an input to the first one and we got y of n as the output. Y of n was given as an input to the second one and we got our original input back as the response, that is x of n. Then we can conclude that these two are the inverses of each other. Let us now write down the condition for two systems to be inverse of each other. In the case of discrete time systems, we can write the convolution of their respective impulse responses, h1 of n and h2 of n, will be equal to delta of n. If we take continuous time systems, then we can write the convolution of h1 of t and h2 of t should be equal to delta of t, so that they can be inverses of each other. This can be easily explained using the block diagram over here. If we apply associative property over here, we can say that these two will be equivalent to giving the same input into a system whose impulse response is the convolution of the individual impulse responses of these two systems. So the same input should give us the same output that this one gave. So we will get x of n here also. So technically, since this system took x of n as an input and gave x of n as an output, this is what we call an identity system. And we already know the impulse response of an identity system is supposed to be delta of n. But here h of n is the convolution of h1 of n and h2 of n. So we can write convolution of h1 of n and h2 of n should be equal to delta of n. The same way we can show that this result is true for continuous time systems as well. Let us now solve a problem based on this. We have to check the invertibility of a system that is defined by y of t is equal to x of t minus t naught. Here the impulse response of the system is not directly given, but we know impulse response is the output of the system when the input is delta of t. So by taking the input as delta of t, we can write h of t is going to be what? X of t became x of t minus t naught. So delta of t will become delta of t minus t naught. And this will be our impulse response. We have to check if a system exists such that when the output of this system is given into that system, it gives back our original input signal. We can see that this is a simple time shifting system. All it does is time shift the signal by t naught. So to recover the input, we just have to shift the output back. So let us take impulse response of the new system h dash of t as delta of t plus t naught. So if you give x of t minus t naught as an input to this system, it will shift it back to t naught units and then we'll get our x of t back. To verify that, let's take the convolution of the two impulse functions, that is convolution of h of t and h dash of t. If we had to take the convolution of x of t and some h of t, this is how we do it. Integral from minus infinity to infinity x of tau h of t minus tau d tau. Here the first function is h of t, which is delta of t minus t naught. We have to write it as a function of tau. So integral from minus infinity to infinity delta of tau minus t naught. The second function is to be written like this. h of t minus tau. But instead of h of t, here we have delta of t plus t naught. H of t became h of t minus tau. So delta of t plus t naught should become delta of t plus t naught minus tau. Here we can write delta of t plus t naught minus tau d tau. Rather than mathematically, let's try to intuitively solve this problem. What are we actually doing when we take convolution? We are trying to find the points where the two functions overlap. This is an impulse function. An impulse function is found wherever whatever is in the bracket is equal to 0. So the first one will be found when tau minus t naught is equal to 0 or tau is equal to t naught. The second one will be found where t plus t naught minus tau is 0. So t plus t naught minus tau should be equal to 0. But we already found tau is same as t naught. So t plus t naught minus t naught is equal to 0 or t equal to 0. So both of them are non-zero at t equal to 0 only. They are overlapping at t equal to 0. What do we call a function that only has non-zero value at 0? An impulse function. Given that these two are also impulse functions, the magnitude is also going to be 1. So convolution of h of t and h dash of t is delta of t, which is enough proof that these two functions are inverses of each other. Let's now solve another problem. We have to check the invertibility of an LTI system whose impulse response is u of n. Let's assume that we are giving x of n as an input, then the output y of n can be written as the convolution of input and impulse response. So x of n and h of n. But h of n is u of n. This is the same as convolution of x of n and u of n. So this is equal to summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k u of n minus k. Now u of n minus k is a unit step sequence. It is 0 for all n minus k less than 0 and it is 1 for all n minus k greater than or equal to 0. For n minus k less than 0, or we can say n less than k, u of n minus k is equal to 0. So do we really have to take the summation from k equals minus infinity? We are taking u of n minus k as a function of k, and k cannot be greater than n. N less than k means k greater than n. If k is greater than n, then u of n minus k becomes 0. That means we only have to take values of k from minus infinity up to n. So we can write output y of n is summation from k equals minus infinity to n x of k. Now when k is less than n, what is the value of u of n minus k? U of n minus k is a unit step sequence. Wherever it is having a non-zero value, the non-zero value is 1. So this is just multiplied by 1. And what does this system do? It is simply adding all the values of x of k for every value of k. We have a name for such a system. It is called an accumulator. Let's assume we have a sequence like this: 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 1. And the zeroth term is 0. If I want y of 1 according to this condition, all I have to do is add all x of k for k is from minus infinity to the n I want. My n here is 1. So I have to add all these values up to the first value. So it will be 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 0 plus 1. That is equal to 5. In that case, what will be y of 2? For y of 2, I have to add all of these including the 2. So technically, I can just take the previous sum and then add 2 to it. So 5 plus 2, I will get 7. In that case, what will be the inverse of this system? Let us say I took y of 2. My input was 2. It got added to the previous output. I want to recover my input 2. What should I do? I should simply take y of 2 and subtract y of 1 from it. Subtract the previous sum from the current sum. So I'll get 7 minus 5, that is equal to 2. So this is all we have to do to get the inverse of the accumulator. Inverse of an accumulator will have this kind of a behavior. It is called first difference. We have learned it before. Now, this is when you're giving an input x of n. If you give an input delta of n, what will be y of n? You will get delta of n minus delta of n minus 1. But what do we call that output? Impulse response or h of n. So, impulse response of the inverse h dash of n will be delta of n minus delta of n minus 1. But we have to verify if these two are truly inverses of each other. So to verify, we have to take the convolution of h of n and h dash of n, that is u of n and delta of n minus delta of n minus 1. But according to the properties we learned, this is the same as taking convolution of u of n and delta of n, then subtracting the convolution of u of n and delta of n minus 1 from it. Delta of n is the impulse response of an identity system. If your input is u of n, your output will also be u of n. So for the first part, it is just u of n minus, we're taking convolution of u of n with delta of n minus 1. Delta of n minus 1 is shifted 1 units. So it is actually just a time shifter. It shifts the input by 1 units. So output will be u of n minus 1. But what is u of n minus u of n minus 1? U of n has value 1 for every n that is greater than or equal to 0. U of n minus 1 has value 1 where every n is greater than or equal to 1. So if you subtract this from this, the only thing that is going to be left is the 1 at 0. And what do we call it? An impulse sequence, delta of n, and it very much proves that these two systems are inverses of each other. The next property we have to learn is causality, and we will start with discrete time LTI systems. We have already learned the definition for a causal system. It is that the output of a causal system only depends on the present and past values of the input. It cannot depend on any of the future values of the input. So we can say y of n should not depend on any x of k where k is greater than n. It can depend on previous values but not any future ones. We know y of n is given as the convolution of x of n and h of n. So it is summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity x of k h of n minus k. But we'll only take the summation from k equals minus infinity to n. Now, impulse response of a causal discrete time LTI system should satisfy a condition which is h of n is equal to 0 for all n less than 0. I'll explain this to you using an example. We have impulse responses of 3 different systems over here, and obviously to get the impulse response we have given delta of n as input and it only exists at n equal to 0. In the first one, the output is 2 at n equal to 0. We gave input at 0, we got output at 0. The output at 0 did not depend on any of the future values of inputs. So this system is causal. Since it did not depend on any previous values also, we can say it's a memoryless system as well. The second one, we gave input here, but we got an output at 0 and also at 1. Let's look at the output at 0. It depended on an input at 0 itself. So that is fine for a causal system. Let's look at the output at 1. It depended on an output at 0, which is a previous input. So that is also okay for a causal system. This system is also causal. In the third one, we gave input at 0. We got output at 0 and minus 1. The output at 0 depended on an input at 0, so that is okay for a causal system. The output we got at minus 1 depended on an input at 0, which is a future input. This is not a behavior that suits a causal system. So this is non-causal. To get impulse function, we always give input delta of n which is at 0. So we can only have output at 0 or after 0. If an output comes before 0 like this, our system becomes non-causal. That is why we have this condition h of n should be 0 for all n less than 0. That is, impulse response of a causal LTI system must be 0 before the impulse occurs. We can also conclude that if input is 0 up to some point in time, then output should also be 0 till then. Only after we give the input should the output come out. We call this condition initial rest. An important thing we have to note here is that initial rest is a condition for causality only for linear systems. Let's take an example to understand that. I'll take a discrete time system that we have dealt with before. Y of n is equal to 2x of n plus 3. We have learned that this is non-linear. Here we can clearly see that y of n is not equal to 0 when x of n is equal to 0. It will still have a value 3, but the system is still causal. The system is causal because y of n only depends on x of n. That is the present input. Not only is it causal, it is also a memoryless system. So the system is causal, but initial rest doesn't apply to it. That's because it is not a linear system. Let us now solve a problem. We have to check if the accumulator and its inverse are causal. For an accumulator, the impulse response is u of n, and for its inverse, the impulse response is delta of n minus delta of n minus 1. We figured that out in one of the last problems. Let's take the first one. H of n is u of n, but we know u of n is equal to 0 for all n less than 0. Isn't this the condition for a system to be causal? The input delta of n is at 0, the output is at 0, 1, 2, etc., but nowhere in the negative side. Therefore, we can conclude an accumulator is causal. Let's take the second one now. Here, h of n is delta of n minus delta of n minus 1. Delta of n is non-zero for n equal to 0. Delta of n minus 1 is non-zero for n minus 1 equal to 0 or n equal to 1. So this is non-zero for n equal to 0 and n equal to 1. They are non-zero only at 0 and 1. And that means they are 0 for all n less than 0, which is the condition for this system to be causal. We gave the input at 0 and we got outputs at 0 and 1. The outputs only came after the input was given. So this system is also causal. Now let us take a continuous time LTI system. We know that the output of a causal system only depends on the present and past values of the input. So similar to a discrete time system, in a continuous time system, the output y of t should not depend on any x of tau where tau is greater than t. So we can write the output y of t will be integral from minus infinity to t. We don't have to take any value of tau that is greater than t. So integral from minus infinity to t, x of tau, h of t minus tau, d tau. Now, impulse response of a causal continuous time LTI system will satisfy a condition. H of t will be 0 for all t that is less than 0. The output of a causal system is only supposed to appear after the input is given. To get impulse response, we give the input at 0. So obviously, the output, which is the impulse response, should only have values when t is greater than or equal to 0. An additional thing we can note here is that a signal can also be called causal if it is 0 for n less than 0 in case it is discrete time or t less than 0 in case it is continuous time. So an LTI system is causal if its impulse response is causal, because impulse responses of causal LTI systems are 0 for t less than 0 or n less than 0. Let us solve a problem. We have to check if the system is causal, if the impulse response is delta of t minus t naught. So this is a pure shifting system. Delta of t minus t naught is a shifted impulse function. So it is non-zero at t naught. The condition that it has to satisfy is h of t should be equal to 0 for t less than 0. When we give delta of t as an input to this system, there are two things that can happen. T naught can be less than 0, T naught can be greater than or equal to 0 also. If T naught is less than 0, the output is over here, but we are only giving input at 0. So in that case, this will be non-causal. But if T naught is greater than or equal to 0, we'll get the output anywhere here and the input is at 0. So it will be causal. So it depends on the value of T naught. The next property we have to learn is stability. We have learned the definition of a stable system. A system is stable if every bounded input produces a bounded output. Let us start with discrete time LTI systems. Consider a bounded input x of n. X of n is bounded, means its magnitude is finite. So let us assume it is less than or equal to some finite value b for all n between minus infinity and infinity. It doesn't matter what value you are giving to n, the magnitude of x of n to be less than or equal to some finite value b. An example for such a bounded function is the sine function. Whatever is the value you take for n, sine of n will always be between minus 1 and plus 1. Now magnitude of the output y of n will be magnitude of convolution of x of n and h of n. So summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, x of k, h of n minus k. We have learned before that the order of convolution doesn't really matter. So we can write this as magnitude of summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, h of k, x of n minus k. This is the convolution of x of n and h of n. This is the convolution of h of n and x of n. They are the same. We already have stated that x of n is bounded for any value of n between minus infinity or infinity. So whatever you give in the brackets, it is going to be bounded. So we can write that means x of n minus k should also be bounded. We can write magnitude of x of n minus k will also be less than or equal to b. Let's go back to magnitude of y of n again. We have magnitude of summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, h of k, x of n minus k. We can write it like this also. Summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k multiplied by magnitude of x of n minus k. We can take the magnitude, then take the summation. But magnitude of x of n minus k is always less than or equal to b. So we can take it out of the summation and we can write it like this. Magnitude of y of n should be less than or equal to b multiplied by summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k. We gave x of n minus k the value less than or equal to b and took it outside the summation. Now the condition for the system to be stable is that y of n should be bounded or magnitude of y of n should be finite. This part is already finite, it's b. Now if this part is also finite, then magnitude of y of n will be finite and our system will be stable. What we can conclude from here is that y of n will be bounded if impulse response is absolutely summable, which means the summation will have a finite value, not infinite. That is summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k should always be less than infinity, which means it should always have a finite value. And this is the condition for stability of a system. Its impulse response should be absolutely summable. Now let us take a continuous time LTI system. Let us take a bounded input. Let x of t be a bounded input. That is, magnitude of x of t is always going to be finite. Let us say it is less than or equal to some b for any value of t between minus infinity and infinity. Then we can write the magnitude of output y of t will be magnitude of the convolution of x of t and h of t, that is integral from minus infinity to infinity, x of tau, h of t minus tau, d tau. But again, the order of convolution does not matter. So we can write magnitude of integral from minus infinity to infinity, h of tau, x of t minus tau, d tau. Now, this is the same as taking magnitudes first and then integrating. So we can write integral from minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of tau multiplied by magnitude of x of t minus tau d tau. But we already defined x of t is bounded for any value between minus infinity to infinity. So x of t minus tau should also be bounded because it doesn't matter what comes inside the bracket, it is always bounded. So we can write x of t minus tau will also be less than or equal to b. Whatever you give inside the bracket, the function will only have a value that is less than or equal to b. So we can write magnitude of y of t will now be less than or equal to b multiplied by integral from minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of tau d tau. We gave magnitude of x of t minus tau, the value less than or equal to b, and then took it out of the integration because it's a constant. So we get magnitude of y of t should be less than or equal to b multiplied by integral from minus infinity to infinity mod of h of tau d tau. For the system to be stable, we need y of t to be bounded. That is, magnitude of y of t should be a finite value, not infinite. B is already finite. So if this is finite, then our system is stable. So we can conclude y of t will be bounded if the impulse response is absolutely integrable. The integration should have a finite value. That is integral from minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of tau d tau should be less than infinity. This is the condition for stability for a continuous time LTI system. Let us now solve a problem. We have to check the stability for a continuous time and a discrete time system that does pure shifting. Let us first consider a discrete time system that does pure shifting. The impulse response of such a system h of n is going to be simply delta of n minus n naught. All it does is shift the input n naught units. To check if the system is stable, we have to check if summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k is finite or not. This will be equal to summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k is delta of k minus n naught, and this is simply equal to 1. It is 1 because delta of k minus n naught is only having non-zero value at n naught. At any other value of k, it is 0. So when you add all the values, you have loads of zeros, then a 1, and then loads of zeros. The summation is 1. It is bounded, so the system is stable. Let us now check a continuous time system that does pure shifting. Its impulse response h of t will be delta of t minus t naught. To check the stability, we have to check if integral from minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of tau d tau is finite or not. This will be integral from minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of delta of tau minus t naught d tau. But this is also equal to 1. Delta of tau minus t naught will have non-zero value at t naught. Everywhere else it will have 0. So if you integrate it, you will be integrating the area of that particular impulse at t naught, and we know area of an impulse is 1. So this is 1. Therefore, this system is also stable. Let us see another problem. We have to check if the accumulator and the integrator are stable. Accumulator is the system that has impulse response u of n. Similarly, integrator is the continuous time version of it. Its impulse response is u of t. Let's take the first one. To check if the system is stable or not, we have to calculate summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity. Let's take the first case. To check whether the system is stable or not, we have to calculate summation from k equals minus infinity to infinity, magnitude of h of k, which is u of k. Now, u of k is 0 for every k that is between minus infinity to minus 1. From 0, it is 1. So, you will be taking summation of infinite ones between 0 and plus infinity, which will give you infinity. Therefore, this system is unstable. For the system to be stable, the impulse response is supposed to be absolutely summable, or the summation should have a finite value. Here we do not have that. Let's take the second one. To check whether the system is stable or not, we have to integrate from minus infinity to infinity. Magnitude of h of tau, which is u of tau, d tau. Now, u of tau is 0 from minus infinity to 0, and after that it is 1 till infinity. So, if you take the integration, this will also go to infinity, and therefore the system is unstable. Now, the last and final concept we have to learn about LTI systems here is their unit step response. Let's start with a discrete time LTI system. Just like we use a unit impulse sequence to show the behavior of LTI systems, we can use a unit step sequence also to do the same. We know when delta of n is the input, output is h of n. The same way, when u of n is the input, the output is denoted as s of n, and we can call it the unit step response of the system. When we give x of n as an input to a system of impulse response h of n, we write output y of n is convolution of x of n and h of n. If I am giving an input u of n, then the output will be convolution of u of n and h of n. And just as I have said here, we call that output s of n. So unit step response of a discrete time LTI system is the convolution of u of n and its impulse response. That is, S of n is the response to the input u of n of a discrete time system with unit impulse response h of n. But by commutative property, we know that the order of convolution doesn't matter. You can write S of n is convolution of h of n and u of n also. So we can say it like this also. S of n is the response to the input h of n of a discrete time system with impulse response u of n. But which system has impulse response u of n? That's right, an accumulator. U of n is the impulse response of an accumulator. So S of n is the output of an accumulator if you give an input h of n to it. That is S of n. The unit step response can be written as summation from k equals minus infinity to n h of k. You can take the summation of the impulse response and you will get the unit step response. We also learned the inverse of an accumulator. It is taking first difference. So if you want the impulse response of a system from its unit step response, you can get it this way. H of n will be S of n minus S of n minus 1. This is the inverse of an accumulator. Let us now take a continuous time LTI system. Here also we can use a unit step signal to describe the behavior of the system. Whatever output you get from the system when the input is u of t is the unit step response of that system, and we call it s of t. If we give an input x of t, we write the output y of t is convolution of x of t and h of t. So if you give input u of t, then the convolution will be called s of t. So step response of a continuous time system, S of t is the convolution between u of t and its impulse response. That is, S of t is the response to the input of u of t of a discrete time system with unit impulse response h of t. But again, by commutative property, the order of convolution should not matter. S of t should also be equal to convolution of h of t and u of t. Therefore, we can say S of t is the response to the input h of t of a discrete time system with unit impulse response u of t. But which system has unit impulse response u of t? That's right, an integrator. So S of t is the output of an integrator if the input is the impulse response of the system whose unit step response you want to find. U of t is the impulse response of an integrator, and S of t is its output if the input is h of t. So S of t is integral from minus infinity to t, h of tau d tau. To get unit step response of a system, you have to integrate its unit impulse response from minus infinity to t. What if you want the impulse response from the step response? That's also easy. We can take the inverse of this system. H of t will be d by dt of S of t, or we can call it S dash of t. Integrating impulse response will give you step response, and differentiating step response will give you impulse response. That's all about it for today. See you in the next video. And don't forget to subscribe.